One of our favorite fruits to eat in South Florida is the Atamoya. This is an Atamoya tree that I'm standing by and a branch that I'm holding, and you can see a fruit in my hand and a fruit on the tree. The Atamoya is in the Annona family, which is primarily a tropical family, and there are many edible fruited species in this family. That one of the old favorites here is called the sugar apple, and that's Annona squamosa. One of the favorites of the Andes Mountains in South America is the cherimoya, Annona cherimola. This one, the Atamoya, is a hybrid of those two. And others of note are the bullock's heart or custard apple, the sour sop, which some of you undoubtedly know. But the Atamoya is the one that we're growing in South Florida commercially. The camera is looking at a tree right now of a variety of Atamoya called the Gefner, which came from Israel. And that is our principal commercial variety down here. This is a tree that's capable of very high yields. A good bit of the fruit has already been removed from this tree that you're looking at. You can see from the bags over a lot of these fruits that there are experiments going on, or let me say that is why the bags are there. There are other reasons for bagging fruit. In some parts of the world, people bag the fruit to keep insects from damaging it, and that is what this experiment is about. We have an insect which lays eggs in the immature fruit, and the larva develops in the seed and then bores holes out through the seed after it pupates and emerges as an adult. So it ruins the fruit. It's called the Annona seed borer, and it's an extraordinary problem to us. We're trying all sorts of experiments to find ways to deal with this insect. It is not feasible for us in general to use chemical methods because this is a very minor crop, and we don't have approval from the Environmental Protection Agency to use pesticides. So we're trying to find if there are biological methods by which we can deal with this crop. Of course, putting a bag around the fruit, I guess you wouldn't call a biological method, but it is a method that doesn't use any pesticides, but it's very tedious. Anyway, to get down to it, the Atamoya makes a small tree. We have commercial orchards of them in South Florida, and there are commercial orchards in a good many other countries. I saw one recently down in Colombia that was very productive. The thing gives 2 crops a year, essentially right during the late summer in August, September, and also during the early part of the winter in December, January, we get another crop. The thing, we ship it to distant markets. It's a fairly perishable fruit, but we know how to handle it, and we can do this now. It's a delicious fruit, and I'd like to show you one and open it up for you. I'm going to cut this one open. This is a different variety of Atamoya. This one is called Bradley, and here you see what it looks like inside. It's got a fairly thin skin and a bright white pulp. This one is a little bit discolored around the core. That's because it split open some on the tree, which is a defect of the Bradley variety, and that's why we don't use it commercially. It has dark black seeds, quite a large number of seeds. The pulp is very sweet and soft in texture. Most of us think it's very good. We eat it fresh primarily, but it can also make it into sherbets and ice creams and whipped up drinks like sort of like milkshakes that the Latins around here use. They call batidos. All in all, a delicious fruit, one that a lot of people here like. We have other problems, fungal problems, that the growers have to deal with, and when the fruits split open like this one on the tree, beetles get into them very quickly and cause the fruit, or I shouldn't say they cause the fruit to sour. It sours, and that's what attracts the beetles, actually. But the Annonas are very nice additions to the home garden, and also a thriving commercial crop on a small scale in South Florida. We have an interesting new commercial crop here in South Florida, and I say that with a tongue in cheek. It's because the passion fruit that I'm talking about isn't a new crop to South Florida, and nor to the tropical world. It's been around a very long time. But we haven't been growing it commercially in South Florida. We've grown it as a home yard crop. The passion fruit grows on a vine, which is grown on a trellis, and we are now shipping a good bit of passion fruit out of South Florida to different parts of the United States, primarily as a fresh fruit. You all, and well, let me say a couple of things about the selections we're growing. We have two types, basically, three actually. One is the yellow passion fruit, which is best adapted to the lowland tropics. Another is the purple passion fruit, which is better adapted to a cooler climate, but we can grow it here, but not really very well. The third type is what I'm holding in my hand, and that is a hybrid between the red and the purple, which comes out either mottled or pink or red. And we find that with the American consumer, the pink and red ones are more in demand than the yellow ones, which is an interesting thing. Traditionally, processors have liked the yellow one because it's usually more acid than the purple, and the purple and its hybrids have been more sweet, and so for fresh consumption, people have liked that better. In case you haven't seen a fresh passion fruit, I'll cut this. The passion fruit, there are many kinds of passion fruit. The one that I'm holding is what's called the Passiflora edulis, the scientific name. And as I say, this one is a hybrid. You see the structure of the fruit. It has a firm, fairly tough rind, a soft white inner lining to the rind, and then a whole bunch of seeds in the center cavity, and around each seed is a little envelope of juicy material, and that's the edible part. Actually, people who really know passion fruit often just eat seeds and all. I've learned to do that in South America when I've worked in the Andes. Lots of people there just eat the whole thing, and I'm sure they pick up a good bit of protein nutrition from the seeds that they wouldn't get otherwise just from the juice, because that's mainly vitamins and carbohydrates and water. Passion fruit, I think you would have to say has one of the very finest flavors and odors of any fruit of the world. It's very intense. It's fine for combining with other fruit flavors and essences, and it has become an extraordinarily popular product in the world as juice, to be used by itself or to be mixed with other tropical fruit juices. And it must be said, as I have already said, that passion fruit is a very fine flavor. And we in Florida, because of fairly high costs of production, are selling, as I said, fresh fruit primarily, but many of the people who buy the fresh fruit are just buying fresh because they know it's fresh and they're using the juice. They're processing the seeds out of it, in a blender and just using the juice for sherbets and drinks and that kind of thing, often to combine with other juices. How much? The price has been pretty good here in Florida. In the early part of the season, people will be getting, $1.50, $2 a pound, but by the end of the season, sometimes it's down a good bit. It's well down below $1, but it's still a quite good price. And as I think I referred to earlier, we're getting a better price on the fresh market for these red and purple fruits than we are for the yellow ones. And sometimes the packing house doesn't accept the yellow ones at all because they have a hard time selling them. So it was a nice hint for the commercial grower. But for the home yard grower, if you're mainly interested in the juice, you can grow the red or the purple, either one. And as I said, in our hot Florida climate, the yellow one is going to survive better than the purple one. So that's sort of a guideline as to what to choose to grow. And most people just grow them on a fence. I have grown them up in trees, sometimes in my yard, and picked them up when they fell off the trees. I have trouble with squirrels eating them very badly, but I share them with the squirrels and I get enough for myself. But if I were in commercial production, I would begrudge the squirrels my fruit, I'm sure. But squirrels aren't a problem in commercial plantations, only around a lot of trees. Here in my hands, a flowering branch of the ice cream bean. This is a a species of Inga. Actually, there are scores and scores of species of these, all of which have pods with edible flesh. This is a legume related to our common bean, except that it's a tree. Many of these grow into a very large tree, and they're native to the American tropics. There are just many, many of them in South America and Central America. This particular one, I'm sorry we don't have a pod today, makes a very large pod. It's about 1.5 inches wide to even 2 inches wide, and 7 or 8, 9 inches long, and 3/4 of an inch or a little more thick. And inside the pod is a fluffy white pulp that surrounds the seeds, and the seeds are funny, soft, greenish-looking things, fairly large, but there's a lot of pulp in these pods, and it tastes sweet, and apparently some people think it reminds them of ice cream, so they call it ice cream bean. These things are eaten rather widely in the countries where they're native, and you find them, if you go to markets in many Latin American countries, you will find these tied in bundles and sold in the markets in fairly large quantity. And I can only assume from that quite a lot of people eat them and enjoy them. I don't think that you could consider them nutritionally a really important thing. They don't eat the seeds, and eating that white pulp I doubt gives you very much protein. I think it's mostly carbohydrate and mostly sugar. But people like sweet things, you know, and so I think you could consider them more a confection than a food. The trees have other uses. They're grown as shade for cocoa and for coffee, and they're grown just as shade trees, and they make up an important component of the forests in places. So it's a tree that has multiple uses. It's a very interesting tree. We grow it here in Florida. It's very tender to frost, and so once in a while we get our trees badly frosted. But most winters it gets through quite well, and these trees that I'm standing by are about 14 years old, and it grows extremely fast. These have been frozen back a couple of times, so they're not as big as they would be otherwise. An interesting tree and a nice addition to our fruit gardens of South Florida if you have room for a large tree.
Very nice.
One of the fruits that I value very highly for home yard planting here in South Florida and other places is the loquat. The loquat can't be called truly a tropical fruit. It's a subtropical fruit. It doesn't grow well in the lowland tropics. We're fortunate here in South Florida, though our climate is primarily lowland tropical, we get enough cool weather in the wintertime for the loquat to bloom well and set a good crop of fruit. If you go very far north in our state, frequently there is frost during the time of bloom, which is during our winter time, and so you don't get a crop of fruit. Gainesville is a good example. They seldom get a good crop of loquats in Gainesville. This fruit is in the rose family, so it's related to apples and pears and peaches. And it's like them, it has, to most of us, a very fine flavor. People from the temperate zone don't take any getting used to eat loquats and like them. It's an extremely useful fruit. It's nutritious too, with a fair amount of vitamin C, some vitamin A. It can be used, eaten fresh. I like to eat it just out of hand. It can be used in jellies and preserves and pies and this kind of thing. My wife likes to use them for topping meats when she cooks roasts and hams and things like that. So it's an extremely versatile fruit, and it produces lots of fruit. And so lots of people like to grow it. It is not a commercial fruit in Florida, and it isn't commercial in many places of the world. There's some commercial production in Israel. It's a tender fruit, rots easily after. It needs to be fairly ripe, not only mature but ripe when it's harvested, and it doesn't have too long a shelf life. It will ferment and turn bad before very many days in general. Though you can keep it in a refrigerated for a fair amount of time. But it's fairly perishable, and for that reason, It isn't grown commercially on a large scale in any place, really, except, as I mentioned, in Israel, in Japan, it's been commercial some. It comes from Japan and China, and it is a much esteemed fruit there, and they have selected fine varieties. So have we in Florida. We have some excellent varieties. And I don't know, I should comment, too, about where it can be grown in the tropics. The only places that I have seen it being grown well in the true tropics are up at pretty high elevations. And many times people there don't esteem it very highly, mainly because they don't have good varieties. And there's never been selection or importation of good varieties from other places. This has always been a project in which I've been interested, and I have sent seed and budwood of good selections to people. It's a point to be made that simply by selecting seed from good varieties, you can do a tremendous amount to upgrade the quality of loquats in an area. And the trees are precocious. Trees grown from seed generally will bear fruit in, say, 4 to 6 years, and so you can run through a good many generations in a relatively short time. So always get the best seed you can find, and you will do a lot towards improving the loquats wherever you're living. I want to show you a couple of things about the loquat fruit. One is the peel. The peel is fuzzy like a peach, and some people prefer to take the peel off before they eat it. I like a lot of fiber in my diet, so I like to eat the peel. So generally I'll rub off the fuzz on my pants leg before I eat the thing when I'm dressed for work. When I'm dressed up to go somewhere, why, I don't do that. I use a cloth or something to wipe off the fuzz. But I like to eat the peel. And I want to cut open a fruit here and show you a couple of things. One of them is, perhaps you can see the dark spots on the surface of the fruit. Whenever we see those here in Florida, we know that there are fruit fly larvae inside the fruit. I'm going to cut some away. And we have in the camera the larva of the Caribbean fruit fly now. It's a maggot, the immature stage of a fly. The fly lays its eggs in the fruit, and the egg hatches, and the maggots eat the pulp of the fruit and ruin it. And it's a pity. We try to control these things biologically by using natural parasites, but it doesn't do a perfect job. We've about given up on pesticides. They haven't really succeeded in control here in Florida. This is a problem we live with, and it causes us a good bit of trouble with some of these fruits. It does not attack our major fruits, and so we don't put major amounts of money into its control here in Florida. This is the damage done by the Caribbean fruit fly to the pulp of the loquat fruit. As you can see, it renders the fruit unusable, really. You've got to cut that part away before you do anything with the fruit. This shot shows the inside of the loquat fruit. This one has one seed. Some varieties tend to have one seed. Others have as many as 3 or 4, and a few even more than that. That's undesirable. The entire pulp is edible. The seed is not considered edible. So the naranjilla has been popular for a long time in its native home in the Andes, and it's been widely disseminated around the tropics, and when you cut the fruit, it's constructed like a tomato, as you would expect. It's in the same family. But the pulp is bright green all the way through, and it has small seeds similar in looks to tomato seeds. And what people do is cut the fruit, squeeze out the juice, and make a very nice beverage out of it. And sometimes it'll be mixed with other things, but usually it's served as pure naranjilla juice. And it makes if you like green things, it makes a very pretty juice. And to me, it's one of the very best of the juices of tropical fruits that we grow in the American tropics or anywhere. It ranks easily to me with passion fruit juice and with soursop juice, and those are things that I consider right up in the top rank of fruits that we use primarily for juice. And it has some rather stringent ecological requirements. For one thing, it's best adapted to a cool highland tropical climate. It'll grow up to some fairly high elevations, 8, 9, 10,000 feet in the Andes, probably even higher than that, but that's the area of best, say from 3,000 or 4,000 feet up to 7,000 or 8,000 feet is probably the best range of adaptation. It is not frost tolerant. Don't make the mistake of thinking that just because it comes from the cool mountains that it's frost tolerant, because it isn't. We've had trouble growing it here in South Florida because of frost, but there are other problems as well. The Naranjilla is best grown in some fairly rich soils reclaimed from forests, and sometimes it's grown with a little bit of remaining shade left from when forest trees are left as the forest is cleared. One problem in the Andes is that people clear new forest land to grow Naranjilla, and it contributes to this general clearing of forests that we are so worried about now. However, it has not become the big commercial thing in South America that it was once thought to be capable of. It's sort of hard to know all the reasons for this, because major companies like Campbell Soup and several other big companies, Dole, for example, have been interested in a major way in Naranjilla, and what seems to happen is that the production costs are high enough that it's hard to make a commercial venture go in comparison to pineapple juice or citrus juice, things like this. It just hasn't panned out to be the really, really large commercial thing that people thought at one time that it would. However, it still is an important local crop in many areas, and maybe somebody will figure out ways to economize the production so that it will become the big commercial thing that people think it has the potential of. As for problems, I've already talked about the general altitudes and kind of climate. It'll tolerate some fair amount of cloudy weather, which is another indication of its adaptation to mountainous, cool climate conditions. It really doesn't do its best in areas where it's sunny most of the time, and it certainly doesn't grow well in arid or windy places. The plant does not tolerate wind well at all. And so if you're growing it where you're going to have winds and cool and dry conditions, then you had better use some kind of windbreaks to keep the leaves from getting shredded up, and those conditions just cause the plant in general to decline. Now, another thing, don't try to grow it where it's too hot. In Florida, we always have problems. It grows pretty well in the wintertime when the night temperatures are, say, in the high 50s or 60s. When we try growing it in the summertime when the temperatures are in the high 70s or low 80s, it doesn't grow well. The plant declines and it doesn't set fruit. It's like tomato. When the temperature gets too high, particularly the night temperature, then you don't get fruit set in these plants. So this is a problem with us in the summertime in South Florida. The Naranjilla doesn't do well, always declines in the summertime and then perks up in the wintertime. Another problem with it, and you'll begin to think that this is a real bad luck plant, it's very susceptible to nematodes. And many of our soils in Florida, particularly the sandy ones, have a lot of nematodes. And I'm speaking specifically of the root knot nematode. And this thing attacks the roots of Naranjilla as it does many other things, and it causes the roots to be stunted and knotted up and to be very inefficient. And the root knot nematode really wipes out the Naranjilla. Now, people do some various things. We cannot, in general, use chemical nematicides nowadays because they don't have federal approval for use on minor crops like this Naranjilla. It's not legal to use nematicides for Naranjilla because there isn't federal registration. Another thing can be done is mulching, and mulching is one useful way to deal with nematodes to reduce their populations. I don't know why it reduces them, but it does. And so mulching with nice organic material is one way to help reduce nematodes. Another way is to not grow them in such sandy soils. If you've got some heavier soils, usually there's not as much trouble with nematodes. And here at Homestead, where we have limestone soils, we have relatively little trouble with that. But so all in all, southern Florida is not a good place to grow Naranjilla because the soil conditions and the climatic conditions are suboptimal. And if you're going to really go into growing Naranjilla in a serious way, you probably ought to move to Central America or South America in some mountainous area where there is a cool and partially cloudy climate, not a really cloudy one. You can't grow it well in a rainforest or a cloud forest that's really clouded in all the time. But you certainly can grow it well in an area where there's cloudiness for a fair part of the day. What else can I say? It's a fascinating plant, and people hope springs eternal because people are forever and ever bringing new seed from South America and growing it here in South Florida, and they're going to keep on doing it, and perhaps somewhere along the line we'll get strains that are better adapted to South Florida. There was a breeding program in Ecuador. I saw some of the plots several years ago. I understand that the breeding program has languished now and is not very active. A few scientists in the United States have been cooperating in that program, and perhaps by the right use of genetic material we can develop some of Naranjilla plants that will tolerate a wider range of conditions.